Okay, as I start recording this video, we are the 8th of April, and I use the opportunity while I'm eating my lunch to record a video. It will be no longer than 30 minutes because this morning I recorded for 30 minutes, so that's a random talk while eating lunch, and here a little bit of ecological virtue signaling. I don't know how you name this in English, and I don't seek to know, but these are locally bought vegetables. This is tofu. It's locally bought and ecological and organic. This is a polenta bought in a solidarity association which sells organic ecological product. And the mushroom, they are with a short sell by date, best before, yeah, the date is kind of, I mean, that's not the date, but they are kind of outdated, not really, but I got them for free, and they are organic, so everything is organic, and either it's bought, everything is organic, everything is bought locally, and some of the ingredients, they have been bought at solidarity associations. Yeah, and I cooked it myself. Yeah, that's my ecological revolution. Yeah, and I have been working this morning, like I always do. I'm a worker. And I will share a few thoughts about economics. What I've discovered over the past few months is that this is a organic, not necessarily organic, but this is bought in an organic shop. Salt, yeah, so it's not industrial salt. A lot of people, they don't read books, so about economic problems, the economic events and phenomena like price inflation, unemployment, the localization, shipping away jobs to Mexico or China or Turkey or Northern Africa or Eastern Europe, or simply the day-to-day experience of economic phenomena like inflation or loss of job or etc. These are singular events and phenomena, but they are governed by universal laws. And what is kind of frustrating is that the people, they keep getting robbed. They steal your money. Yeah, they keep getting deceived and robbed without understanding the reason why and without even seeking to understand. This is why, here a little bit of virtue signaling, I have been distributing, and I continue to do so, dozens, hundreds of books with food stamps to help people who are really poor, to help them, not financially directly because I do not give money, but to help them by providing them with supply anonymously, but also to eventually help them to change their diet, to buy more organic, more vegetarian, and to encourage them to read, to become readers. And as far as I know, it has worked because it has an impact. It's not massive yet, but it's not fruitless. Yeah. So yeah, the ordinary people, they keep getting robbed in a way because they do not understand the underlying processes, the structure, the order, the economic laws at work which cause the negative phenomena that they experience. And I see the deception because I was reading How to Think About the Economy by Mr. Per Byland. He published, as I record this, on the Mises Institute, he made a conference with a great graphs about the rising standards of living over the past 2 centuries under capitalism, not pure free market, but since the Industrial Revolution and the liberal, in the sense of classical liberalism, the liberal capitalist Industrial Revolution, the percentage of people living in extreme poverty has decreased drastically, and the population, of course, all over the world has increased exponentially or enormously. So yeah, if we judge capitalism, if we define capitalism as the order based on private property, individualism, entrepreneurship, liberties in the economy, which starts with the Industrial Revolution in England from a technological standpoint, and then from a legislative standpoint with the American and especially the French Revolution, and then with the impact of liberal ideas brought forth by the Napoleonic invasion of Germany and of the rest of Europe eventually. So the liberal ideals and ideas which were tied with nationalism, because it was a first for political liberties which went hand to hand with economic liberties actually. So since the advent of classical liberalism a couple of centuries or over the past 2 or 3 centuries, depending which defining moment is chosen. Is it the publishing of Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations? Is it the bourgeois revolution of 1789, the first moment of the French Revolution? Because here it's kind of a Marxist analysis, but it's partly relevant. There were 2 French revolutions, actually there was only one, but 1789 was bourgeois, liberal, Anglo-Saxon in mind, and 1793, 4 years later, it degenerated in terrorist, leftist, egalitarianism. So but so the results in terms of population expansion, life expectancy, overall wealth, plus literacy, leisure, etc. over the past 2 centuries has been enormous. So and that was about Per Byland, but I was reading the book, and I intend to talk about the NBA as well to illustrate Austrian economics. He takes the example of minimum wage law to illustrate the importance of ideas and logical reasoning in economic theory, namely what he calls the seen, the unseen, and the unrealized. The seen are the observable data, the unseen are the counterpart, that which is a consequence of the economic policies implemented but which are not considered either because they are indirect or they are longer term or they affect another aspect of the economy. So what is not considered, what is not seen, and the unrealized are all the potentialities, the virtualities which are not made wirklich because of limitations. Yeah, it's kind of very interesting because precisely the Austrians, they do not focus on the observable data, but they focus about the logical order underlying the appearance of the phenomena, and in this sense, they are metaphysicians. That's why they have, I wouldn't say a bad reputation, but that's why they have almost no reputation among economic circles of state-hired ideologues, because they are metaphysicians. So first, they are metaphysicians, and metaphysics has been discredited since Kant in intellectual circles in the West. And second, they are pro-free market, and the free market is not advocated by statist intellectuals because they are on the paycheck of the state. So since Keynes, they are persona non grata because they are free market, and since Kant, it's a way of talking, they are persona non grata because they are metaphysicians. I'm perfectly well aware that the Austrian School appeared at the end of the 19th century, but here it's just metaphysics is persona non grata since for the past 250 years broadly. Yeah, but the illustration with minimum wage, this is something, here it might seem common sense to people with vague economic literacy, but for someone who comes from a socialist country, it's really enlightening because the minimum wage really is destructive, because I just repeat in my own words what he says, but that's very smart. When the politicians artificially increase the minimum wage, it seems to be a good idea because there are poor people and we all want to help the poor, and it seems that the poor, they will be richer, they will have more access to consumption, it will improve their standards of living, because we see the rise, the automatic decreed by legislation of their wage. But what is not talked about, envisioned, or even most of the time not understood is that raising the minimum wage doesn't mean to make people richer, because politicians cannot create wealth. They can only either steal wealth and redistribute redistribute stolen wealth, or even most of the time destroy wealth. Politicians, here Hopper makes this very clear, politicians cannot create wealth. In the best case scenario, they limit their destructive impact by nonetheless only stealing and redistributing from one branch of the population to the other. That's the least worst, but most of the time, not only they do this, which is morally dubious and populist in the negative sense, but also most of the time they destroy wealth by preventing its creation, or by wrecking the economy and stuff. So yeah, but what was I saying? Minimum wage law. So the politician, when they raise the minimum wage, or any other type of regulation, but let us take this example, it seems that it creates wealth because suddenly poor people, low-skilled workers, they earn more. But actually, it doesn't consist in raising the wages earned by low-skilled workers. It consists in preventing legally businesses and companies to hire under a certain amount, which means that either companies, they have to get rid of some employees if they can legally, or if they are in financial trouble, they have to get rid of some employees because of the increased cost induced by a higher minimum wage. So it literally destroys jobs. And second, because they are forced to overpay either their current worker because they are forced to raise the salaries, or if they had the plan of hiring new workers, they are forced to hire them at a higher wage, and the worker, they are not necessarily capable of producing the amount of expected value that their skills, in the perspective of the entrepreneur, enables them to create, compared to the salaries that the entrepreneur has to pay. In other words, I take a illustration. If a worker can produce skills which, in the view of the businessman who hires him, are worth $12, if the minimum wage is raised to $15, it's not economically rational to hire this person, because he will cost more than what he can produce in terms of value creation, expected value creation. So a lot of people will not be hired because the state legislation forces them to sell their service, their labor, their workforce, to a price higher than what it is valuable, depending on their skill set, on the market. So you produce systematically, in a systemic way, you produce unemployment. And another problem, those people, instead of accepting, in a non-regulated economy, instead of accepting low salary, which would enable them to be trained, which would enable them to gain skill, experience, competence, a working habit, if they are prevented from getting a job because the businessmen do not want, or the CEOs or the boss do not want to hire them because it costs too much, they will not get the training, they will not get the experience, they will not build their career, they will become unemployed, and then the politicians, they can say, oh look, they are unemployed, there's unemployment, these are the capitalists, the rich, we need to implement regulation to distribute money to the poor who suffer because of the scheming of big business, the capitalists, the 1%. Yeah. So it gives, so the politicians, they wreck the economy, which creates unemployment, and then it gives them the moral justification to bring more regulations to try to fix the problems that they have created by stealing even more money from the taxpayer and gaining ever more power and regulations and the moral high ground. I see the deception. So, constantly, in a heavily regulated economy, there are jobs which are not attributed. So wealth is not created, but skills, experience, working habits are not encouraged for structural reasons. And this is the unrealized. Yeah. And here, I know how the people they think, because I'm familiar with German populist politicians. I found myself in a situation like this when I sought a job. I had no experience, and which made me more difficult to hire, because someone with no experience, I was already old, one might say. So yeah, so it was in my interest as a person with no experience to accept jobs at at the lowest possible pay in order to be hired, and then to work on the job and to acquire experience, and then to earn better wages if I perform well, if I'm reliable, etc., etc. But I was prevented from this because of legislation, because there are very high minimum wage laws. But I was hired because I'm disabled. But it's kind of like affirmative action, actually. There are quotas, businesses, there are companies that are forced to hire a certain amount of disabled people, etc. But if, from a psychological standpoint, if you know that you are hired because you have to fit into a certain quota, it's degrading. Yeah, that's how I experienced this. But I was competent nonetheless, so yeah. But yeah. So what I try to express with this anecdote is that even because the poor people or the demagogues, they might say, oh, but those who advocate the abolition of minimum wage, they are the rich, the capitalists, etc. No, because I was in the position of the poor, unexperienced person, and already, it was a few years ago, without a couple of years ago, without having fully understood the economic theory, but I was already vaguely familiar. I was on the side of the poor and without experience, etc. But I was morally, I agreed with the capitalists simply because in this sense, it is right, it is correct. It really, the legislation about minimum wage, they really distort and distort the economy, and they prevent people with low skills or no experience, or the young, to acquire experience and to improve and to make their way to the top, or to climb up the economic ladder, one might say. Yeah. And what is very frustrating is that all the demagogues who use the ignorance of the people in terms of economics to mislead them, I understand why there are demagogues, but what is frustrating is that the people, they do not realize that their economic literacy and economic education, or rather lack thereof, is provided or not provided by the state. The very fact that people are educated by the state and then they are employed by the state, the politicians run for position in the government of the state, it's how should I explain this? It's the idea that the state educates its citizens. When you think intelligently about this is completely ludicrous. It should not happen. It's not the role of the state to educate its population, because otherwise it's very easy to manipulate completely. It's like the wolf raising cattle. And the reason why I appreciate the Austrian economist is not because I care about the economy or about economics, but because they are metaphysicians. I discovered this 5 years ago. Spontaneously, I was attracted to them because they have a sound reasoning. The consequence is that their views on economics are sound and correct most of the time. And they are much more intelligent than most other schools of thought. But what I find interesting is the metaphysical aspect. And what is pervading throughout the worldview of Austrian economists is a disregard for the facts, for empiricism, precisely because this is just the seen, and we do not see the unseen nor the unrealized, and they understand, to simplify very briefly, the view of the Austrian is that what is important in economics is not the data, which can be measured, quantified, analyzed, etc. It is the conceptual structure, the Weltanschauung, the categories which enable to interpret the data. But they begin by the theoretical frame, the logical deduction, and only then are they able to interpret or to make sense of the infinite amount of economic data which are available. There can be empiricism is wrong in economics and the social sciences at large because it's not like the natural world. You cannot repeat experiences on inanimate or not inanimate, but in non-living objects. A human population is not like a ball rolling on an inclined plane or a large collider, large electron collider, or chemical substances in a laboratory, etc. It's much more complex, and because humans they have a soul and a mind. They have intentions, a purposeful behavior, as Mr. Byland says after Mises. Humans act. Stones, asteroids, chemical substances, stars and planets don't. Yet. So, the connection with the NBA or soccer at large, the view that I have in mind is the football managers, the managers in soccer who win trophies while managing big teams, talented, big clubs, wealthy clubs with talented players, or very competitive, very valuable players in a basketball team. The connection with the Austrian method in economics is that the average person, if he analyzes just the data, he can see, I don't know, LeBron scored the Dwayne Wade scored, I don't know, on average 26 points. I'm not an expert in NBA, but he scored a lot of points. And yeah, here, I will illustrate. When there is a team which is heavily reliant upon one player, that was the case with LeBron at Cleveland, as far as I know. Those who do not understand basketball very well, they just look at the statistics and imagine LeBron scores lots of points but his team loses. They can say the Cavaliers or the Lakers lost in spite of LeBron scoring 26 points on average over, I don't know, 20 games, I don't know, or in spite of LeBron scoring 40 points in a game or 45 points, etc. So if they see LeBron has scored a lot of points, but the Cavaliers or the Lakers lost, they might think they lost in spite of LeBron scoring so much points, but actually someone who vaguely knows about basketball, he would probably say the opposite. He would say, no, they lost precisely because LeBron scored, let us imagine one game he scored 40 points. Which means this is the same set of data but interpreted completely differently. Namely, if a basketball player, it's not because a basketball scored lots of points, but if a team is really dependent upon one player, it's not a sign of potential for success. It's a handicap. It hampers the potential success of the team. So the example, it works in soccer as well. It works in, I'm not sure that in rugby that's different, but in soccer and in basketball, if a team is heavily reliant upon one player, if you just look at the statistics, you might say they lose or they win because the player scored a lot of points, or they lost in spite of the main player scoring a lot of points. But actually, a lot of time, if the team really is too dependent on one player or a couple of players, usually it's the opposite. For someone who knows about sport, usually it's they won in spite of their dependence on the main player, or they lost because of their dependence on the main player. Yeah, but then to know that, you have to have knowledge of basketball and team sports. And in the case of football managers, there are those who say, this manager, he won that amount of trophies, therefore he's successful. But the people who know a little bit more about soccer, usually they say, when a manager has been individually successful but is criticized nonetheless, usually they say he didn't, the team that he trained did not win because of his management, but they won in spite of his management. Namely, if the team who was very talented, above the competition, if they had been trained and managed by another manager, they would have won even more. And this, of course, it sounds like speculation, but it can be rationally defended and backed up by people who really know what they're talking about. And the Austrians, they are precisely the guys who do not accept the data. I mean, they accept the data, but they do not accept an interpretation starting from the data. They start with their metaphysical system and they deduce the meaning that has to be given to the set of data, and only then can it make sense. Yeah, that's why they are intelligent, because their metaphysics, praxeology, is kind of solid. It's much more solid than all the other economists who are morally corrupt because they are on the paycheck of the state. And if they are not morally corrupt, they are metaphysically incompetent because they are unaware of the category, the underlying metaphysics that they use. They use this unconsciously. This is already the criticism that the boring German metaphysician made of Newton. He said the physicists, they use a metaphysics, but they are unaware of the metaphysics that they use to, yeah. Okay, 35 minutes. That was my view about economics. Yeah. What is frustrating is that the bad guys, as they are depicted by the mainstream media in the realm of economics, namely the free market libertarian guys, they are on the side of the people. They are the good guys. It's true. And the proof that it's true is that the country which was one of the most right-wing, if we can talk about right-wing, in terms of economics, that's the US, and it was the country, up until the 1950s, where the poorest members, at least of white society, were the most well-off than in any other country. Namely, even the poor in the US, when it was still free market, capitalist, non-interventionist in the economy, they were poor relatively to those who were more well-off, more successful in American society, but they were much wealthier than a lot of poor, but also even median income people in not only Western Europe, but in the rest of the world. There were inequalities much larger than in the Scandinavian countries or a country like France or the socialist countries. The inequalities were more important, but the bottom level, except the extreme cases of poverty, but the poorest member in a broader sense, they were relatively poor in comparison with the wealthiest, because free market allows tremendous inequalities, but they were well off nonetheless in comparison with almost all the workers of in the rest of the world. Yeah. And here that's the Marxist origin of cultural Marxism, precisely because the Marxists in the 1950s, they noticed that that's a well-known story, but actually that the working class did not buy into Marxism in Western Europe, precisely because capitalism, as they call this, allowed them to increase their standards of living significantly. They had become bourgeois, working class people. That's a way of talking. And that's why the intellectuals, they started to give up on improving the life of the working class, and they started to talk about the transgender, the migrants, the homosexuals, the women, etc., etc. So that's a proof that's paying homage to capitalism, because precisely capitalism was so successful that those leftist intellectuals, they had to invent oppression or problems, or to import poor people, to import migrants or immigrants who were much poorer and who came from much poorer country, to reintroduce poverty, inequality, oppression, real or imagined. Because if there were not all these problems, those white leftist intellectuals, sometimes Jewish intellectuals, but those white leftist intellectuals, they would be unemployed. Yeah. I'm not weird. I'm not insane. I am neurodiverse. Neurodiversity is our strength. It brings intellectual and cultural enrichment. Yeah. So now I will go back to work.